If you're like many of the athletic women in my community, you're always wondering what's the deal with protein around your training? What does the research say? What are the best practices? And on this podcast episode, we're going to be diving into this topic so that you'll understand a little bit better what to do with protein intake around your training. We're also going to summarize this entire series that we've done on protein and give you some practical tips that you can walk away with. Welcome back to the podcast. I'm so very glad that you've joined me today. Thank you so much. Whether you're tuning in from your favorite podcast app or you're here on YouTube watching me, hello, then make sure you subscribe in both places. It really does help. And while you're on YouTube subscribing, hit the bell for more notifications. And that way you can hear more about when we have episodes coming out. On this show, we're going to be diving into sort of the last installment of this protein series that we've been doing here on the show, all about protein and a deep dive into a lot of these different priorities related to protein intake for active and athletic women, especially if you're over 40. What do you need to know? And so if you haven't yet listened to the other episodes in this series, I highly recommend you do that before you consume this particular podcast episode about protein intake, timing, and training. It is if we're talking about the priority level here, this is a slightly lower priority item in the universe of protein that we've been talking about. It's not insignificant, but if you have no idea where to begin or you're just starting out, this is not the most beginner friendly or useful, frankly, thing for you to start stressing out about. You really need to go back and do things like figure out how much daily protein you need and what does that look like, to think about how you're spreading it across your day. And then we talked about protein quality and what that means and how to make sure you're just getting the highest quality proteins possible, depending on how you choose to eat. So if you're just coming in, this is the first you've heard of me, or you're like newer to training or sports, or you're sort of newer to this idea of fueling, then this is likely not the thing that I want you to stress out about. Okay. So we have to keep that in perspective, if you will. What we are going to talk about on this podcast is the protein window. What does the research say about that? And in practical terms, what do we have to consume around our training? What does that even mean? And then we're also going to look at just a little bit of a side topic into probably the most important meal of the day for protein intake. Then we're going to wrap it up by kind of giving you some practical takeaway tips and what to do. Now, I have to say that most of the time when my clients come in to work with me, they don't necessarily need more information. Many of you, if you've worked with me, have listened to this podcast. You probably consume way too much information, frankly. Good quality information is important, but what you really need is help and support in the implementation phase and putting it all together so that you can start building the habits, getting through the stickiness of the mindset that you're going to face, because it does come up in building the systems in your life, in creating an environment that's supportive for you to actually put these things into practice, because we can't keep doing the things we were doing when we were in our 20s. We need a different approach. We have to understand what that approach is based on our changing physiology in our 40s. And as we go through life, post 40, what does that look like? So I really want you to, if you're curious and you're like, oh, this is me, like I need guidance, I need to put it together. I know that on my own, I'm just not going to follow through, or like I'm going to hit these sticking points and come to a stopping point. Then I want you to go ahead and check out Strength Nutrition Unlocked. This is my signature program where we put it all together. You have coaching, you have support, you have community, and you're not doing it alone. And you see results so much faster. And we save you so much time because you're not just throwing everything at the wall and seeing what sticks. So to find out more and apply, head over to stephgaudreau.com/apply. There you can fill out the application. We'll get on the phone with you and see if you're a good match. Can we help you? And we'd love to welcome you into the community and see how you thrive. Okay, so let's go ahead and talk about timing around training. This is really the final pillar. And as I mentioned in the sort of prequel to this episode, is like if you imagine a triangle or a pyramid, this is like the top toward the top of the pyramid in terms of importance. In other words, if we're not eating enough protein during the day at all and we're falling far short on that, it's a better idea to work on that first than stressing and sort of worrying about how much protein around training and what timing and all of those things. But if you are someone who does have a really great handle on things like how much protein you need daily, are you distributing it evenly throughout your day? And are you selecting high quality protein sources as much as possible? Then I would say this could be a topic that you're like, all right, I'm going to set my sights on this and see how I can, I hate this word, but optimize what I'm doing here. So we need to sort of think about this in terms of why, again, reminding you why is protein important for athletes and athletic people, even recreational athletes. I know some of you, it's going to be a side tangent and maybe a bit of a rant. Some of you hate that word athlete. You do not think you're an athlete. You reject it at all costs because you think an athlete has to perform at a certain level or look a certain way. But really, you are training with consistency and intention, and it's a part of your life, and you are an athlete. Just accept it. Okay. It'll be much easier to have this conversation. I say that with a lot of love, but suffice to say, why does this matter for you as somebody who's like going in, lifting weights, challenging yourself, running, pelotoning, like crossfitting, you're doing all this stuff. Why does this matter? Specifically when it comes to eating it around your workouts. So protein timing is really a discussion that in people's minds has to do with things like bodybuilding. We've had this concept of an anabolic window. It's been long debated, and it's of course spilled over into these other disciplines, these other sports, and other fitness pursuits, if you will. So what's going on here? If you are training for things like competition levels of muscle hypertrophy, you're trying to be a bodybuilder is what I'm trying to say. Is there a magical post-workout window where if you get your protein in, you're going to like somehow maximize muscle protein synthesis? So this is another question I hear. And like many topics in nutrition, whether any specific timing is going to be relevant to an individual will frankly depend. And whether there's a narrow post-workout window for getting those nutrients in is really still being debated. Let's talk about that protein window then. Most of the more recent consensus seems to be that what people believed was a teeny tiny narrow protein window that you could take in your protein post-workout and like see any benefit from it is less like a tiny window or a tiny sliver and more like a barn door. It's less likely that we're measuring that quote unquote window of time in terms of minutes. People used to be like, it has to be 30 minutes. It has to be 30 minutes. It's more likely that we're measuring this in terms of hours, a few hours, and less likely that if we miss the 30 minutes, then the window slams completely shut. Okay, so I just want to put that out there, and then I'm going to do something in a minute, which is going to sound like I'm contradicting myself. So let's say your total protein intake is optimal. You're eating 3 to 5 higher protein meals distributed across your day, and your total protein quality is pretty high. Hint, we just talked about that stuff in the previous 3 episodes. So go back and listen to those if you haven't yet. Let's say you're taking off all those boxes. At that point, specific protein timing isn't like the utmost critical thing for you, right? If you're like ticking those boxes, like if you're getting your protein an hour after you train, it's probably going to be fine. And you're not going to notice a hugely detrimental effect to that delay because you're going to be eating another meal with that really like solid 30 to 40 grams of high quality protein relatively soon anyway. So when you spread those meals out across your day, it means that there's a good chance that one will fall into that either pre-workout window or that post-workout window. So how we slice and dice it tends to not be as important. Now, all that being said, if you are somebody who trains first thing in the morning, there is probably going to be an advantage to you not going into it fasted, in terms of, especially we're talking about more intense lifting. We're talking about more intense cardio. Now, the cardio element, certainly we want to talk about carbohydrate to really be the focus there. So what I tend to recommend for people is a small snack sized portion of carbohydrate, hopefully something more on the fast digesting side, and a little bit of protein to just get your day started. And yes, you will be able to hopefully take advantage of that as fuel on board and feel a lot better. So the research on like, oh, I have to do fasted workouts because that's going to help me burn more fat is not, that's been debunked, right? But it's still there. It's still out in the world. So I see with most of my clients, this is sort of like anecdotally from working with all of you, you feel so much better when you have a small snack on board if you're training first thing in the morning. Now, if you're training more like at noon, you've tended to have hopefully, at least one meal before your noon training session. It might be breakfast and a snack, something like that. So you tend to have some fuel on board, and it becomes less crucial if you're eating something before training. After training, though, we do want to think about giving you a good whack of protein after your training. Does it mean you have to like stress yourself out and get it in within that 30 minutes, or you've lost the opportunity? No. Okay. So that's the consensus of the research, is like, we haven't lost the opportunity for muscle protein synthesis. If it's minute 31, we're going to be fine. I will caveat this. And I said earlier, I was going to contradict myself. I see in too many of my female clients that you wait for literally hours after your workout before you eat anything, because you're busy, you have demands, like you got to go back to work, like whatever the case might be, you just forget. There's a lot of factors here. But if you've just put in the effort to lift heavy, go hard, do your, hard hit session or whatever it is, and you're going to wait for hours, this is also not optimal either. And so I need to like give you of course, it's like, if it's not if we don't get our protein at minute 31, we've lost the opportunity. No, but do not wait hours and hours either. Especially those of you who are 40 and up and you're like, I'm just trying to put as much muscle on my frame as possible now. So do not wait hours and hours and hours to eat a meal after you train. That's not serving you, and it's not any benefit for you. It's not giving you any benefit. Okay. You need to stop the process of muscle protein breakdown. You need to get the process of muscle protein synthesis going for repair and recovery and building and all of those wonderful things. So that's what we talked about in the previous episodes. The last thing I want to talk about in this episode before we move into kind of wrapping everything up is protein intake at breakfast. I know there are so many people that are like, I'm not hungry in the morning. And many times that's because you've trained your body to not eat earlier. Once you start introducing breakfast or small meals, snacks, it could take a few weeks, but you'll start to notice you will regain that sense of hunger earlier in the morning. Okay. I know people think this is so controversial. Like, of course, intermittent fasting has taken root in this athletic female population, especially over 40, and is really, I'm going to be brutally blunt here, is really fucking a lot of you over, because it's just causing way too many issues. Like, you are starting the day at within day energy deficit. You're not getting that protein post workout or even anything pre-workout. You're just like, your sessions are really hard. You're not recovering. If you want to go more into intermittent fasting for female athletes over 40, see the episode I did with Dr. Stacy Sims. We went way more into depth on it here, and then I'm going to do here. So all of that being said, one area where specific timing does appear to have an advantage is in protein intake at breakfast. Now, we're not going to get into the nitty gritty of like what time of the day does mean breakfast. It's just getting something after you wake up and not waiting until the noontime or the afternoon to eat your first meal. There was the 2021 paper that showed that the timing and distribution of a higher protein intake at breakfast compared to leaving your higher protein intake until dinner was positively correlated with strength and skeletal muscle volume in healthy older women. This finding held up even when breakfast protein was high and dinner protein was lower. Now, yes, we still want to distribute our protein evenly across the day when at all possible. What this points to or seems to indicate is a circadian rhythm component to how our bodies utilize protein for muscle growth. And, again, this is the opposite pattern from what many women do with higher protein at dinner and minimal protein at breakfast. I've seen this literally twice in the last 2 days. One was an email that I got from a person talking about their sort of eating patterns before, and they were eating low protein and fasting. This is an athletic person. The other is someone that I was working with, and very similar, right? Like daily protein or daily food intake looked adequate in terms of calories, but it was shifted away from the breakfast time. So anecdotally, and this is just me and my experience and working with people, when my clients make an effort to get a good protein-centered breakfast, they have much more stable energy and better appetite control across the day. They're able to put more effort forth into their workouts. They're not feeling as drained. They're not feeling as sore. And they're getting better results from their training. They're getting more muscle. They're building more muscle. They're seeing higher strength numbers and progression over time. So that's the sort of takeaway message here, right? We talked about protein timing, this protein window, which seems to be much wider than was ever thought in the past, which is good. We don't need to stress, but we also don't want to be very casual and wait for many hours to eat protein after a workout. Whether you need a specific source of protein pre-workout, for most people will come down to when does your workout happen? So we can kind of keep that in mind as well. And if you've been hitting those more high priority items, the necessity to stress about the pre or post-workout protein kind of fades away because we're taking care of it in those other meals. All right. So let's go ahead and kind of summarize everything and kind of give you the bullet points for this whole entire series. Okay. So prioritizing your daily protein intake. We have recapped 4 pillars here for active athletic women. I don't care if you call yourself an athlete or not, but you're training, you're intentionally working out, you have goals, we're working out with purpose and intention. You fall into this category. Even if you would call yourself more of a recreational exerciser or you're elite, like it all matters. Okay. So number 1, pillar 1, the most important, total daily protein intake. Number 2, daily distribution of that protein intake across your meals. Number 3, protein quality. And number 4, specific timing considerations. So it's important to point out that these are like independent variables. Changing one will have impact on the others. And frankly, this is where a lot of you do need support from a coach. And again, I'm more than happy to discuss that with you about what that would look like for you. So go ahead and get on our call calendar over at stephgaudreau.com/apply. But a lot of you need help in the implementation. You've listened to the information. You are intelligent. You understand why it matters, but it's putting it together. It's getting through those sticking points. It's saving the time, because we don't have, once we're 40 or higher or older, higher, that sounds weird. Once we're older than 40, time becomes more and more of the essence when we're talking about building muscle and adding strength and quality of life and our energy levels. Like this stuff ramps up in terms of its importance and in terms of the fact that we don't have as much time to spend kind of doing it all ourselves and, making all the mistakes, and like, let's just save the time and get better results now. Okay. So if you're struggling and you're like, I'm just like, how do I make this all work? I promise you it's not you. It's just, you have to be able to pull back. You have to have the experience. You have to have the knowledge of the sticking points that people face, the mindset challenges that you will get into along the way. That is where guidance is invaluable. And that's what we do in Strength Nutrition Unlocked and the other nutrition offers that I have as well. So let's kind of break this down here and recap and summarize the practical recommendations. So these are my broad brush stroke recommendations, right? Make sure that your total daily protein intake is at least 1.6 grams per kilogram. Again, there's variety here. There are there's room to customize and take your unique situation into consideration, but this is just general, right? Consume 3 to 4 meals of 30 to 40 grams of protein distributed across your day. Keep your protein quality high with a bias toward, if you can, and you're willing to, protein dense animal food sources. Do not forget, of course, plants are a vital part of a nutritious diet for the micronutrition, for your gut health, for your fiber minimums, for deliciousness. Plants are important. But if you are open to and willing to, protein dense animal food sources are going to give you the highest quality protein in terms of digestibility and essential amino acid content. Eat one of those meals as a breakfast, and after one of your main trainings, and one of those after your main training session for the day, if breakfast doesn't already cover that. So again, how we define that and apply it for you is going to vary, but we'd really, really like to see you eating a breakfast. I know you're protesting right now. You're rolling your eyes, but I promise you I can't think of a single person who was like, that was the worst thing I ever did. People, the clients that I work with, the women that I work with, notice so much more of a benefit, frankly, from getting a solid distribution across the day and making one of those earlier in the day if you tend to put off eating a meal until much later, typically. And this is a process, right? And in terms of things that support this information, I mentioned this earlier. Your habits are going to have to change. And that includes things like shopping, meal prepping, eating, setting work aside, not skipping lunch, making time in your calendar. If you're self-employed, which is, I know some of you listen to this show and you're your own boss, and you're like, every day you're working through Zoom meetings, you're working through lunch on Zoom. You got to find a way to, and I know I say that and you're going to think she doesn't understand. I do understand, but no one can, I don't know anybody here that like somebody's going to come and feed you grapes. No one's feeding you grapes, right? You have to set that time aside. I know it's hard. It's not the easiest thing, but you have to start somewhere. Where do you start? I mean, I am a huge fan of starting with like one meal at a time, right? If you can, trying to just start in one place and not do too many things all at one time. I know we talked about plant-based protein in the previous episode. So again, I would recommend using an isolate like soy or pea and rice. And you can have those alongside your main whole food meal if you need to. And of course, that's just something to consider. So we can go in a lot of different directions in terms of how you actually apply this and make it customized to you. But ultimately, you've got to start with one meal and dial that in first, then go to the other meals in the day, because we're just trying to be perfect at everything. all at once, it's not going to work. You're going to get overwhelmed and you're going to say, fuck this. I'm not doing this anymore. This is too hard. And you're going to just go back to your old habits. So there are lots of ways to customize this. Keep those 4 big pillars in mind. And if you're like, I need help with this because I've been trying to, and I'm still really finding it too hard, then come and work with us in Strength Nutrition Unlocked. At least get an application in and we can, get you on a blueprint call and start talking with you about where are you at and where's the gap and can we help you close that gap? What do you need to close the gap? What do you need to start taking your training results, your energy, your strength, your muscle, performance? And it's also performance in life. It's not just performance in your workouts. It's what your workouts enable you to do and how you feel and how you be outside of workouts. Because hopefully you're doing this for a long time. You're doing this because being strong is such a catalyst for expansion in your life, feeling strong, feeling capable and confident in your body, and having the energy to do those things is a catalyst to exploring, to doing challenging things and growing. That's why we do this. It's not just to have hot looking muscles for beach season. I mean, that could be one of your goals, but if that's the only reason you're doing this, it's not going to last. So I hope this series on protein has been useful for you. Of course, there's a mountain of nuance beyond what we even talked about. And it probably scratched a little bit deeper than just the surface, which I'm hoping. So go ahead and leave a comment. Tell us what you think about this episode or this series. It would be really interesting to see what you're going to take away, what you're going to implement, and what really stuck out for you. On your podcast app, hit subscribe. And of course, on YouTube, hit subscribe as well and ring the bell for more notifications. You can get the show notes for this episode at stephgaudreau.com, and you can apply for Strength Nutrition Unlocked, which is my signature program, over at stephgaudreau.com/apply. Okay, I finally made it through all of that. I'm really getting used to recording with video again, and I keep looking at myself and thinking, oh my gosh, you're going to mess up those words. It's so different than just recording this on audio. So thanks for bearing with me. Thanks for being here, and go ahead and stay tuned for the next episode that comes out of the Fuel Your Strength podcast. And until then, stay strong.